Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this committee meeting of the Planning Committee for Boston Borough Council. My name is Councillor David Middleton. I'm the chair of this committee, and on my right is David Scoot, the vice chairman of this committee. We also have with us our legal representative who will describe herself, and our planning officers are sat next to her.
Thank you, Chairman. Lisa Davis, Senior Planning Lawyer.
Phil Norman, Assistant Director for Planning.
Abby Marwood, Deputy Development Manager for Boston Borough Council.
And Ian Carrington, Senior Planning Officer.
So we move on to housekeeping rules, and the restroom facilities on this floor for ladies and halfway down the main stairwell for gentlemen. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, officers will escort everyone to the nearest safety point in the rear of the car park. Please ensure that you are addressing this meeting when you do so through the microphone system at all times. Members of the public are free to leave the meeting at any time, and our planning support officers will escort you downstairs. And finally, please be advised that abuse or intimidation of any kind will not be tolerated. Anyone who is deemed to breach this requirement will be warned and asked to refrain. And if the behaviour persists, they will be asked to leave the meeting. So we now move on to part one of the agenda and address the preliminary items. So to receive apologies for absence and notifications of any substitutions.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Savikian with Councillor Ariambath substituting, and from Councillor Sharp with Councillor Staples substituting. Councillor Staples is en route, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. To sign the minutes of the last meeting held on the 5th of March 2024. Do I have committee's agreement to sign these? Before we move to individual declarations of interest in respect of any item on this agenda, I will ask Karen to give the standing declarations.
Thank you, Chairman. For public information, I would confirm that standing declarations of interest will be recorded within the minutes for this meeting for all members of this committee who are also members of Lincolnshire County Council, members of the South East Lincolnshire Joint Strategic Planning Committee, and representatives of the Internal Drainage Board. Thank you, Chairman.
Does any member of the committee have any further declaration of interest to make in respect of any item on the agenda, please? No? Okay. So next is to receive any written questions from members of the public.
No questions, Chairman.
So that concludes the preliminary items, and we will now move into part two of the agenda and receive the reports tabled. Our first item of business today is planning application B2400115 on page 13 of the agenda, and will be presented by our planning officer, Mr. Ian Carrington. All yours, Ian.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning, members. I'll start by taking you through some slides of the site and the plans, and I'll show you some site photographs. And then I will briefly summarise the planning situation which is set out in the report. So if we begin by looking at the site location, as you can see, it is just the southern part outlined in red of a rather larger site which is outlined in blue, and I'll come on to explain that in a few moments' time. And the existing site has nothing on it. There was a bungalow on the left-hand side of it that has now been demolished. As you can see, and we'll show you in the photographs, there's quite a lot of trees on the front boundary. And the proposal is to put 4 detached dwellings with garages on the site. The dwellings themselves these are the ones for plots 1 and 2. All of them are red brick with grey roof tiles, relatively conventional, traditional design. Have a look at plot 3, very much the same, and plot 4, again the same but flipped around. Moving on to the site itself, excuse me. As you can see, those trees on the frontage, that is Wash Road looking to the east. The site is on your left-hand side. And again, you can see the foliage on the front of the site, which would be largely retained. There would be 2 new entrances cut into that. If we move on, we'll see that's the existing entrance that would be retained. And next door, there are no residential neighbours. Next door on the west side is the New Life Church, which is not a very churchy building. It's a modern industrial looking building, and that rather matches the industrial facilities which are already in that part of the world. That is the site itself looking to the north. And if we go to the next slide, we can just see on the left the building of the New Life Church, and there is planning consent, which I'll come on to in a second, for housing all the way to the trees you can see in the distance, so all the way to the far north end of the site. And that consent it actually includes the site we're discussing today. So if we now swivel around, you can see there's some rubble. That's the remains of the bungalow that was. We're now sort of looking to the northeast, and if we swivel around again, that's looking to the east. And again, you can see in the background there a further commercial building about 100 yards down the road. It's separated from this site by its own car park. You can see that hedge there. There is on some mapping, that is the location of a watercourse, but we can't find the watercourse in real life, and the internal drainage board have been to the site and had a look. It appears just to have been filled in, so I'll just mark your card on that one. Just a final few slides, because it comes up in comments by the parish council and in my report, and that is the junction of Wash Road with the A16. That is taken from just outside the New Life Church, which is on the right-hand side. If we now look at it from the A16 looking south, you can see the Wash Road junction on the left there. And finally, looking north, as you can see, there is a filter lane that is from the 16. You can just see the building on the corner there. That's a garage Jaguar dealership, which is in that location. So I'll briefly summarise the planning considerations. The matter has been called in by the ward member, Councillor Pryke, to allow public consideration of matters including highways, local road congestion, access arrangements, layout, and concern about overdevelopment of the site. Now, the planning history is really important in this particular case. The principle of residential development is already established. An application B150503, which was initially refused but was allowed on appeal, granted consent for more than 30 dwellings on a site which included all the land running up to the north and this chunk here. That permission has been implemented with the demolition of the bungalow, so there is extant planning consent on the site. In addition, a 2019 application allowed reserved matters, detailed particulars for that, and that included a treatment where there would have been 8 dwellings on this site. Now, policy number 1 of the local plan identifies Curtin as a main service centre. It is generally supportive of redevelopment of the site for housing. So this scheme would have the potential to provide housing in a sustainable location. And it would therefore meet the aims of policies 10, 11, 17 and 18 of your local plan, and indeed the aims to encourage housing growth, which are set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. So the principle of development of housing on this site is considered sound. The applicant, by the way, has said that if this is approved, they will submit an application which will modify and adjust the existing approved plans for that northern part of the site, so they bed in with these. In terms of character and appearance, the area overall is part of the built form of Curtin and indeed Greater Boston. There's extensive housing on the western side of the A6, and of course that which has been already consented to the immediate north. There is extensive commercial development to the east and particularly to the south. There is tree-lined frontage, as we've seen in the photograph, which will be partly retained, and the design, as we've seen, is traditional red brick with grey tiles. That is considered likely to integrate well with the character of the area and therefore to be in keeping with policies 2 and 3 of the local plan. This application must, of course, be judged on its individual merits, but it is noted that under that 2019 approval, there would have been 8 dwellings in the form of 2 blocks of 4, 2 little mini terraces of 4. The present proposal for only 4, which will be fully detached, is considered to have less impact and to be better suited to the area. Brief note about public and neighbour amenity. As you've seen, there are no residential neighbours. The development will not adversely affect the proposed dwellings to the north, nor will it be affected by the commercial or institutional development around it. Chairman, I turn now to highways and access, and we'll be hearing later from the Parish Council, but as you will have seen from the committee report, that is a matter which has concerned them greatly. As I've said, 2 new access points will be added to that tree-lined frontage to give access onto Wash Road. Now, the Parish Council, and you can read their comment in full in the report, has objected in part on highway safety ground, and it asserts that there is no additional capacity on Wash Road and is concerned that the junction with the A16 will be a hazard for future occupants. And it also notes that in the previous consents, all the access from that larger site would have been to the north onto Station Road, which is at the top of the site I showed you earlier. Now, you won't be surprised to hear that we've discussed these matters in detail with the County Highways team. It confirms that it is satisfied with the access arrangements as proposed and doesn't make any objection to the proposal before you today. In discussion, it has pointed out that the whole of the Curtain Distribution Park, which is immediately to the south of Wash Road, opposite this site, will use Wash Road and its junction with the A16 for access. And that's access for both employees and the distribution park and goods in and out. And that park, as you know, is not yet fully built out. We had an application last year which approved a further new factory there, which will employ more than 200 staff. And I believe there's another application which is very close to being approved or has been already. The park is filling out. But as far as highways are concerned, Wash Road and its junction with the A16 has the capacity to take all the flows from the distribution park, compared to which the amount of traffic which will be generated by 4 new dwellings is basically negligible. So in your officer's view, it would not be safe to refuse the application on highways grounds. Just a final note on highways. In our conversations with the County Highways team, they made the point that they would like to see a pedestrian and cycle access preserved so that people from the housing consented to the north would have an active travel route through to Wash Road and to the employment land to the south. So as you'll see from the description, we slightly adjusted the eastern boundary, pulling it back from that tree-lined hedge by a couple of meters. That land is, of course, in the ownership of the applicant, and that is where in future space has been retained for a footway, cycleway link. A brief note about flooding and drainage. It is in flood risk zone 3, this site. We believe the development can be implemented in line with the Environment Agency matrix. It does require the buildings to be jacked up by 500 mil in terms of finished floor levels and flood resilient construction methods. That can be secured by condition. In terms of the sequential and exception test, well, the site already benefits from an extant planning permission. This is an extremely important fallback in terms of our deliberations this morning, and we don't think that it would be reasonable to require the sequential test to be completed afresh. So to conclude, Chairman and members, we have a site which has already got planning consent for housing. This proposal will provide for 4 dwellings in an appropriate and sustainable location for residential development. There won't be any adverse impacts on neighbour or public amenity, The access will, as we've heard from our expert advisors, be safe. And although there is flood risk on the site, it can be mitigated. And the development finally will be in keeping with local character. So I conclude that the development is therefore in keeping with your local plan and with the requirements of the NPPF, and it is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions which are outlined in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Carrington. We do have speakers on this item, all of whom are aware of their time constraints. Do we have a Mr. Michael Braithwaite? If you can take the seat, Mr. Braithwaite. You're speaking as the agent for the application. Please begin your presentation when you are ready, and please remain seated once you have finished to take any questions from committee members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Michael Braithwaite. As you've already said, I'm the planning consultant appointed to represent Seagate Homes, the applicant for 4 dwellings on Wash Road, Curtin. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning. As your case officer has said, the site is part of a larger area which benefits from a part implemented planning consent for 31 dwellings. The extant planning permission, again, as your case officer said, would deliver 8 dwellings in the same area covered by the current application. Unlike the current proposal, however, those 8 dwellings, together with the 23 other of that development, will be accessed from Station Road to the north. If this application is approved, a new application, again, as your case officer has said, would be submitted to amend the original consent to reflect the reduced site area for the extant planning permission. This would not result in more than 31 dwellings being constructed on the overall site. The red line for the current application has been amended to allow for the construction of a footpath linking the wider development area to Wash Road. This was not part of the approved scheme for 31 dwellings, although the applicant has been prepared to accept that request in response to the Highway Authority comments. The footpath will be linked to pedestrian and cyclist use and will not allow vehicular access to the wider development to the rear. Only the 4 dwellings under consideration today would have a vehicular access to Wash Road, in effect a net gain of 3 dwellings beyond the bungalow which was previously on the site. Although objections have been made regarding the increased traffic on Wash Road, the Highway Authority has no concerns regarding the traffic generated by a net increase of 3 dwellings. The main development site will still use Station Road for its vehicular access. The footpath link has been excluded from the red line because the link would serve the dwellings on the wider development site and not the 4 dwellings under consideration today. And therefore it will be more appropriate to deal with that as part of the revised application for the 23 dwellings for the area to the rear. Although 4 dwellings will allow access onto Wash Road, the layout of the development will retain all the trees along the site frontage. Like the extant approval, those trees will be pollarded as part of the ongoing management. This will reduce the existing canopy and the impact on those trees. Opportunity has also been taken to use the existing gaps in the privet hedge where possible to access the proposed development, reducing the loss of hedgerow. The retention of the trees and limited loss of hedgerow, together with the replacement of 2 blocks of 4 terraced houses from the part implemented scheme with 4 dwellings, will reduce the visual impact on the development when viewed from Wash Road. Therefore, we trust the committee will support the officer's recommendation and approve the application.
Thank you, Mr. Braithwaite. Very concise, which is nice. So does any member of the committee wish to ask Mr. Braithwaite any questions? Blimey, it's a first. This is your last chance. Our second speaker is Curtin Parish Councillor Christopher Astle. Please begin when you are ready and please remain seated when you have finished speaking to take any questions.
Good morning. I'm Chris Astill, Parish Councillor for Curtin Parish Council. Can I take this opportunity to thank you for giving me the opportunity to address Boston Borough Council on planning matter B/24/01115, Wash Road, Curtin. I would like to talk a little bit about the history leading up to this application. The history to this application was noise levels. To remind us of what happened in the past and what used to be, you could not build an industrial estate up to housing, but you could build housing up to an industrial estate. This is where Homely comes into action, as far as I can see. Concerns were raised about the noise levels, mainly because of the close proximity of the said property, Homely. In 2005, plans were submitted for an industrial estate east of the A16 to be accessed from Wash Road, and Homely, I think, was the only problem. It was deemed that the property be demolished or relocated at the other end of the plot towards Station Road. The reason being noise level. Until the removal or the resiting was done, the condition about the noise level was in perpetuity until Homely was removed. With this now done, a plan was submitted and passed for the whole of the area of the land between Wash Road and Station Road, and for it to accommodate 31 properties, but with no access to this site other than Station Road, and this was in 2019. On that plan at the south end, up to Wash Road and opposite the industrial estate, the plan showed 8 properties that all had rear gardens up to the Wash Road boundary. Erection of an acoustic hoarding was on that plan to the Wash Road boundary, obviously to cut down noise levels. These properties, as the rest of the 31, were all going to be accessed from Station Road. Also around the industrial estate, it showed a soil bund or a bank together with tree planting scheme. Both the amount of traffic on Wash Road and the A16 has dramatically increased over the past 18 to 19 years since the original application for the industrial estate. And it's forever growing, the industrial estate. Going forward, we now see an application for 4 properties planned to front onto Wash Road and 3 access points onto Wash Road. Then very recently, we see a further alteration or amendment to facilitate a pedestrian and cycle access to the remainder of the houses on the site. Could we possibly see an amendment, if this is passed, that the 4 houses are squeezed up to make room for, in fact, vehicular access onto the rest of this site? And what has happened to the problem first raised about noise levels? Because this has increased, not reduced. Also, the volume of traffic on the A16 along it and exiting and joining it onto Wash Road has dramatically increased as well. Why couldn't these 4 houses, if the 8 that were originally there, not remain on the site being accessed from Wash Road, as the road plan is still on the plan, and therefore it would have solved the problem of A, entrance onto Wash Road, and B, the noise problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Astill. Have we got any questions? Councillor Astill, it seems that you're being allowed to return to your seat. Our final speaker is Councillor Ralph Pryke, who is the ward member who called this application to committee. Councillor Pryke, you are not subject to any time representation. Please remain seated when you have finished speaking to take any questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, no worries, I won't exceed any expected time limits. I have a few brief comments. I've been aware of this plot of land, the area that was designated for 31 houses, over the last few years, and I have observed the discussions about it in the parish council, and also I have spoken with residents on Station Road and elsewhere in Curtin about housing and this particular application. I think it's fair to say that up until this year, residents' concerns on Station Road and Horseshoe Lane at the likelihood of considerable numbers of vehicles from this plot of land accessing the road system through an exit onto Station Road at the top would have been complicated, to say the least, because people generally expect there to be 2 or more vehicles per house on most housing plans nowadays. And people tend to go to work at the same time broadly in the morning, come back later, and that considerable congestion would have been caused on Station Road, Horseshoe Lane, and the Curtin roundabout because of that. Some residents had suggested, and they'd suggested this some time ago, that although the original permission forbade entry and exit of vehicles onto Wash Road from that development, that maybe an arrangement could be made with the owners of the land, which is now the New Life Church site, could be made to allow vehicle access to that site further over, not on this particular bit where 4 houses are now being proposed. Now, that may or may not happen. Given the planning officer's discussions with the highways officers, that's something we can't really speculate about, but I think it's important that the planning committee be mindful of potential congestion at the other end of the site because of what is going to happen. And therefore the contradiction with the original condition for that site, that if the 8 houses in 2 blocks of 4 were to be built, measures were supposed to be taken to reduce the noise impact on those houses and presumably the rest of the estate. Now, as my colleague from the parish council has said, the industrial estate has grown considerably since those proposals, and further applications are anticipated. It is already a major employment site in the area, and although the original permission, which I think was 2005, specified a requirement for travel plans to minimise the amount of private vehicles going to that site for employees, we are not aware of any travel plans. The site is quite a long way from any public transport points. The nearest bus stop is several hundred meters away. The bus service is quite erratic. The first bus in the morning arrives after 9 o'clock, which is too late for most employment purposes. And the last bus to leave in the afternoon goes at 3:20, which again is impractical for employment purposes. So there are no easy public transport options for people who work on the distribution park Avalon estate. The names, I think, are used generally for both bits. And therefore, there is a growing amount of traffic using Wash Road for accessing the employment site. Already, residents further down Wash Road are complaining intermittently about large vehicles cutting through from Fosdyke to get to the estate to avoid using the A16 and the junction to Wash Road. I don't know whether highways are going to put a weight limit or any other limitations on the other roads further down, which might be difficult given there are some big agricultural uses of those roads and small industrial uses of those roads. But that is a complication that the people living in that area are having to live with now, and they worry that it may get worse as the estate grows. That is something else that we have to be mindful of. With the original proposal that if the 8 houses were going to be built at that end of the 31 house site, measures would have to be taken to alleviate noise nuisance. The bund, as Councillor Allett referred to, and the panels, which the plan showed. Now, if the construction of 8 houses needed measures to lower the impact of noise, one would have thought that the same thing would apply to 4 houses built in the same location, that they would need measures to reduce the noise. Yet, as far as I know, there are no proposals for any other noise barriers between the roadway, the estate, and the proposed houses. So, in conclusion, the question is, what has changed? What has changed is that there is more noise from the estate, and that will presumably be more of a nuisance to the 4 houses proposed. That is not a very good thing, because I don't think the developers are going to be proposing measures to alleviate the noise nuisance. Properties may well be double glazed, but they will still be facing onto a relatively major road servicing a large employment area. I wanted to bring this matter to the planning committee because of the concerns that had been expressed to me by residents from different parts of Curtin over this development, who are also concerned that it's another very small development, 4 houses only, no social housing element, no contribution to amenities in the area. And Curtin is a growing village with quite a lot of housing developments, many of which have not and will not be contributing to the impact they are making on the community. The schools in the area are full, the surgeries are busy and crowded, there aren't any dentists, public transport is very, very poor in the area, non-existent on a Sunday and very, very intermittent on a Saturday. Yet permission is given for dwellings with no parking spaces even in Curtin, which haven't been developed yet because no one can make a commercial go out of them. Curtin has also suffered from a number of small planning applications for a number of dwellings, some extremely large, but in numbers insufficient to justify a contribution, Section 106 or other infrastructure payments to the area. The village is straining at the moment, and granting permission for albeit one application for a small number of houses is not, that's not a reason to refuse that, but it is increasing the strain on the locality. And I would hope that the planning committee will be mindful of this, because I'm sure it affects other villages with growth points to them, particularly Fishtoft. And I think that is detrimental to the well-being of our local residents across the borough. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Pryke. Have we any members with any questions, please? Okay. Would you like to ask any of our planning officers for confirmation? Yeah, Councillor Pierpoint.
Listening to the last 2 speakers regarding noise, there's, apologies.
Well, we don't, do we want to ask him a question yet? We don't know. So he can stay while he, can he? Can he stay while we finish the questions?
Yes, Councillor Pride can say and answer
Yeah.
the question in respect to what he said.
Mr. Carrington,
Sorry, my apologies. You are asking the questions of officers.
yes,
So there are no questions for Councillor Pryke, in which case, Councillor Pryke, you will need to leave the meeting now, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Carrington. The two last speakers clearly were very concerned and really sort of went heavy on the noise levels. Reading the documents that you've prepared here, very thorough, very detailed, Maya, saying very easy to understand. There's no mention at all about noise levels. So obviously, I'd be interested to know why you have no concern over the noise levels, and yet our last two speakers seem to have a lot of problems and issues about noise levels, perhaps even going further when the development's built and ongoing. Could you probably enlighten us why that isn't in the plan, in the documents?
Yes, indeed. It starts with the basic principle that notwithstanding the history of the site, we obviously have to look at this application in terms of its own individual merits. I think the first thing to say is that the council's environmental health team was consulted on this application and they have no concerns. I'm going to see if we can just put up an aerial photograph of the site. And I'm going to just zoom it slightly out if I can manage that. So we have a lot of delay on this. That is the site there. So if we look at the neighbours and think where this noise might come from, on the eastern side, you've got the New Life Church. Well, yes, there will be church services there, but they're contained within a building. And sorry, on the western side, and then just beyond it to the west, you can see what's in that photograph is a building site. There are further community buildings going up there associated with the New Life Church. Again, these are intrinsically not noise generating because activity is in them, is within them. To the south of the site, in other words, opposite it on the south side of Wash Road, we have the Jaguar dealership. And again, its car parking is shielded by the building itself. So we're not looking at something which is generating intrinsically a great deal of noise. On the western side of the site, you can see the mouse is just catching up. This large white building, its car park is to the east. I'll get my east and west sorted out in a minute. Its car park is to the east. There is some storage of pallets, which you can see on the satellite photograph there, closest to this site. But again, any activities there are commercial, they are contained within the building. So we don't have a huge amount of noise generation immediately adjacent to the site. And of course, to the north of it, there would simply be further housing when the housing already consented is implemented. So in terms of big industrial noise, like a foundry or whatever it might be, we do not have those generators, and therefore it would not be reasonable in our view to install any kind of noise attenuation measures.
I'm just obviously concerned about the residents' concerns regarding noise. There's no consideration at all for noise barriers or anything like that, so that you know, we can at least have residents that are happy and contented and not worried about any noise or that might, you know, endanger their sort of life, you know.
Well, Chairman, through you, I'd be more than happy if that's the will of the committee, should the committee decide to go ahead with the scheme, to go back and consult again with the environmental health team, should they wish there to be a condition which you could impose on, for example, acoustic fencing to either side of the site. That's something which we could put in a condition. I'm more than happy to talk to environmental health if that would address your concerns.
Councillor Woodcliffe.
Oh, sorry. No, you go first.
Ladies,
You said W.
go on.
No, just a quick question. Has the occupants of the industrial estate changed since 2016-17 then? You know,
Sorry, I struggled to hear the question. Forgive me.
quick question. Has the occupants of the industrial estate changed since 2016?
Oh, the short answer is I wasn't here in 2016.
I'm just wondering about the noise.
In terms of
Was
noise,
the occupants noisier then than they are now, is what I'm trying to establish.
I simply don't have the information to answer that. What I do know is what is there now. And that is obviously what we have to consider. The potential for future expansion of the estate. Well, as I said in my report and in my earlier remarks, the estate has not yet been completely built out. It will continue to expand. But as you've seen from that aerial photograph, the expansion of the Curtin Distribution Park will be to the south of the Jaguar dealership, which is a very large building. So that acts basically as a screen from those noise generators. Traffic, of course, generates a certain amount of noise, but that's factored in any case.
Yeah. And just second point is Seagate Homes, they have the option on all 31 dwellings, not just the 4.
That's correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Woodliff.
Thank you, Chairman. Couple of questions. So one question is that are there any protective species resident on this site which are to be developed? I don't see anything in the report about that. And I suppose actually also I noticed that it's exempt from the biodiversity stuff, but if it weren't, would it pass? Thank you.
It is indeed exempt due to the date that it was submitted from the new national biodiversity regulations. So that doesn't apply. In terms of protected species, we're not aware of any, but there are, of course, national legal requirements on any developer, for example, doing activities during the bird nesting season and so on and so forth. But we're not aware, there are no records of any protected species on the site. Remember, that was a domestic garden until fairly recently.
Coming back, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a different question. So we're going to have 4 houses on this side, and there's going to be development to the north. Is it intended that there will be a connection between the 2 sites, or will the 2 sites essentially be separate? There'll be no connection through.
There would be a pedestrian and cycle connection immediately to the east of this site, so they would be linked in that respect. But obviously, it would be the back garden of the new dwellings, should you approve them, which would form the boundary with that further housing to the north. There would be a pedestrian and cycle connection, yes.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually quite surprised that the issue seems to be noise. This is part of my county council division, so I know all the area very, very well. I was expecting the stumbling block to have been the access onto the A16. Now, although I've read and looked at all these things, can you first of all, Mr. Carrington, remind me, what was the B/15/503 appeal? And I just want to make an overall comment to the committee. This, of course, is a business park. It is not an industrial estate. And I liken it with my Marsh Lane industrial estate, where, you know, that is industry with noise. This is business. And I would have thought that anything is really only related to the vehicular traffic coming to and from the businesses there. I'm not aware of anything noisy, but maybe somebody can tell me otherwise. Right, so I'll first of all just ask then, please, what was the 15/503 appeal, please? And then can you remind me also of the 19/0317, because although I looked them up last night, I can't instantly recall them. Thank you.
On the 2015 application, that was an outline application which covered the whole of the site. So this bit of the site and then that bit I showed you earlier in blue going off to the north for 30 plus houses and the demolition of the bungalow, which was on this part of that land. That was originally refused, of course, under the old local plan, and it was granted on
with all the conditions, etc., and all the rules and regulations outlined in the report. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. So we move on to our second item of business today, which is planning application B240087 on page 27. And this will be presented by our planning officer, Mr. Lewis Humphreys. Thank you, Mr. Humphreys. We do have speakers on this item, all of whom are aware of the time constraints in place.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I get into the presentation of the item, I've just got a little brief update to the report to give to members. We have received highways comments. They are supportive of the application subject to additional conditions. They have recommended conditions in relation to maintaining a height of the boundary treatment at no more than 0.6 metres so that it doesn't obstruct visibility turning in and out of the site, and an additional condition requiring that a 2 metre wide footway connects the development to the existing footpath network. They have also recommended a condition in connection with surface water drainage, but as I'll cover later, surface water drainage is an outline matter, and that condition has already been imposed on the application. On the previous application. So there is just a minor update to the recommendation that we would recommend approval with those 2 additional conditions. Onto the application itself. It's reserved matters application for the access, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale of a storage building in connection with the adjoining Envirotire site. Sorry. There we go. The site is a triangular piece of land. You can see the existing Envirotire site is off to the southeast, edged in blue. To the immediate west of the site is a small solar farm and then an Anglian water site beyond it.
Can we just zoom in on that a little bit? So
yes. Is it catching up? Let's just do that as the next one. So you've got we've got the road comes down from Sutterton, runs along the east side of the site. You have the junction with Mill Lane just visible there in the north of the site, and houses that are accessed at Reed Point are just that access is opposite Mill Lane. There is another business and dwelling immediately to the east of the site, north of the Envirotire site, and a separate unconnected bungalow to the south of the existing Envirotire site. The junction with the A17 is further south of the site. Outline planning permission, as I say, has already been granted. That granted permission, subject to several conditions, for a storage building that can only be occupied in connection with the Envirotire site. This application, as I say, is specifically for the reserve matters. So how we consider the impacts of the proposal as they as those matters relate to access, appearance, layout, scale, and landscaping. So principle of the building there has already been established by the previous permission. We're not looking at whether or not the use is acceptable here. The main considerations are the impact of the proposed building, or officers consider the main issues to be the impact of the proposed building on the character of the area and its quality of design, the impact on neighbour amenity as it relates to the matters that we are considering now, and the impact upon the highway network and the level of parking that has been provided. The building itself is quite large in scale. It's a fairly basic floor plan, entirely given out to storage space, apart from a small mezzanine amenity area that you can see in the bottom corner there. The building itself is 6.75 metres to the ridge and 4.75 metres to the eaves. It's a 45 metre by 60 metre building with a gross floor space of just over 2,600 square metres. We have had amended plans to show a detailed parking layout. You can see here that there's space proposed for 6 HGVs parking spaces and 18 car parking spaces. That would is considered to comply with Annex 6, Appendix 6 of the local plan with the parking standards, and they have then provided illustrations to show that this space is adequate for the manoeuvring of HGVs within the site. This application is recommended for approval, and it includes within it a condition that would require that this space be available for the parking, turning and manoeuvring of vehicles at all times. Just to provide some brief photos of the site, as you can see, it is currently very open. You've got views through beyond the site to the north. There's an existing clump of trees in the northeast corner that are beyond the site and are within the neighbour's ownership. There's a boundary hedge that runs along the west of the site. Just looking the other way, that area that you can see there is as an existing informal access. That's where they would propose the access to be. It's immediately across the road from their current access point. There are two trees just on the very tip of the site, just beyond this photo, off to the left, that you can see here. This is looking from the existing EnviroTire site to the south towards the A17. Just looking back up, those two trees and the shape of the site mean that there is already a reasonable amount of screening there for the proposed building. The proposed building is going to be very visible as you move past the site, but would initially be quite obscured as you were approaching from the A17. And then equally looking in the other direction from Mill Lane, you have existing screening, but it does provide a gap. There is a gap there where the building will be visible. That will be the other key view. It is proposed that there would be, just dash back to the site plan. It is proposed that there would be tree planting along the eastern boundary and two clumps in the northeast and one in the south that would provide further screening. Our view is that on balance there would likely be some harm to the character of the area arising from the loss of openness that you see of that site. You would lose those views through to the wider countryside, but this is outweighed by the benefits that arise from the expansion of an existing business in that area. In terms of amenity considerations, noise was considered at outline stage, and there were two conditions imposed regarding opening hours and the hours in which they can move around the site, that should limit the impact on neighbour amenity, and we don't anticipate that there'd be a harmful impact arising from that. this doesn't propose any additional openings on the north or the east of the building. So that's kind of as we expected based on the outline application. So noise is not really a consideration at this stage. Given the proposed height of the building and the existing planting and the distance between the proposed building and the nearest neighbour, we don't anticipate that it would have any harmful overshadowing impacts on that neighbour. And lastly, as I said earlier, we think that the proposal will provide adequate parking and turning space, and that Highways have confirmed that the access point there would be safe and wouldn't have a detrimental impact. So our recommendation is to approve, subject to the conditions that are in the report and the 2 additional conditions that I mentioned at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humphreys. So our first speaker is Miss Katie Edwards. Come forward. So you're speaking in objection to the application. Please begin your representation when you're ready, and please remain seated once you have finished to take any questions from the committee.
Hello, thank you. My name's Katie Edwards. I'm speaking as a resident of one of the neighbouring properties, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of my neighbours at Reed Point, particularly Holly Cottage, which is the one that borders the site more directly. They've asked me to raise our ongoing concerns of this development, namely in terms of the size, scale and appropriateness of the development, as we feel that this has then an ongoing impact on other things, and I appreciate that we can't consider all of them at this stage, but I just wanted to raise them as our ongoing concerns. We are particularly concerned about the size and scale of it because we do have issues with flooding on our area, and any bigger building, we're worried that will have an increase impact on the flooding and drainage of the sky, where we regularly struggle with the flooding on our properties, particularly the increased runoff through the road into the properties across the road, and particularly because there is no real good drainage on that site itself. And we are in flood zone 3 as well. The other reason that we're a little concerned on the size and the scale of is with the environmental impact of the wildlife. We do have bats and birds in the area, so we're particularly concerned about how the site will impact on things like light pollution and the habitat around it. We have an ongoing concern about traffic, and whilst we appreciate they have moved the access down to more opposite their turning point, we regularly have issues with lorries going through the village and going the other way, and we have had lots of historical accidents at the junction with the A17, so we're just naturally concerned about any increase in traffic. The final point that we wanted to raise is that we are again concerned about the use of the building of the site, and we appreciate that there is an impact on there to be, a condition to sort of say it's for storage only. And at this stage, that's all we can say, but we are concerned that they are in a tyre recycling business, and that we would not want to see tyres being stored so close to a neighbour's property in a building, which then a whole hazardous waste, because it's just such a huge fire risk, and it's naturally really concerning. We do generally feel that this business has probably outgrown their site and it's not in the right place anymore. We're on the edge of a village. It's impacting the impact, we've acknowledged the fact that it's going to have a visual impact as you enter our village, and we just would, whilst storage is a better use, we would ask that there were some conditions on the size and scale of it to help minimise all those risks going forward. And that is all I needed to raise really at this point. Thank you.
So does any member of this committee wish to ask Ms Edwards any questions? Councillor Pierpoint.
Thank you for your presentation. Do you have any issues with the company there currently on the site? Are they giving you any problems as they are at the moment?
We have issues with their lighting on their current site. There is some very bright security lighting that affects our property, one of my neighbours' properties particularly. Historically, we have had issues with, so I've been told by my neighbour that originally on their previous site, they were asked to ensure that vehicles would go to A17 junction and not go through the village, but this has not really been adhered to, and it doesn't really matter. And just historically, they've not been very sympathetic to the neighbours and respectful of the neighbours' properties when we have tried to speak to them in the past. But we don't want to. We've not got any objections to them as a business at all. It's just the appropriateness of where they are and what they do, because they are a. I think it's because of it being a tyre recycling, which is a hazardous business. It just has that huge concern that we are quite close to neighbouring properties. There is more development and more housing being planned in the village, although that's a bit further away. It's just that ongoing precedence that it might set that actually an industrial site there are other places that we feel that it would be better placed really, that's more away from a residential area, and we're outside of the scope of the actual village envelope anyway, so we're in the more rural part of the village. So with the traffic and the operating hours, and whilst we can put all the conditions in, we're just anxious that these be enforced, in particular to the drainage. And again, I appreciate this is not part of this matters. They have often referred to the fact that they drain into a stream, and there is no stream there. It's all we have as part of our drainage is dikes that serve our properties, and we are actually slightly concerned that they may be draining into that and putting pressure on our water courses. We have off-grid gas, we all have water treatment plants ourselves, so we only have mains water coming in. We're not part of the national network, so that is another concern for us, that any additional building or anything, particularly if there's a staff area in there, that's then going to need more plumbing and things put in. Is that, where is that plumbing going to go to? How are they going to maintain that drainage and that kind of bit? So yeah.
I appreciate that you have got a lot of concerns, and I wrote every single one down that you said, and there's quite a few on that list. Can I ask you to be more specific and give me one or two of the main concerns? Because we could do a list of 100 odd things that we're not happy with, and I'd like to get an understanding of what your main one or two issues are that's really worrying you on this application.
The main one, I think, is the scale of it and what impact that will have on the drainage, because we do get flooded. We've had really quite big problems. One of my neighbour had a major flood, my garden floods regularly, and it comes very close to our house. So drainage is one of them. The second one is the traffic risk. I think they're the two main concerns that we have. Is there any impact on traffic coming through the village? Because you're not talking people just going to work in cars, you're talking HGVs. And there is a very sharp bend right opposite our property and opposite the properties going in. And we have so many near misses with people racing around that bend. It's a blind corner. So any impact on more traffic going through, we're just really worried about. And so it's a safety, from our point of view, it's more the safety aspects than anything. Safety to our properties in terms of drainage, and safety in general in terms of traffic.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Broughton.
Just a quick point, Chairman. Recycled tyres are, as you've stated, could be hazardous. Are you aware of any incidents that's happened in the past with fires or anything like that?
Personally, no, but we have had issues with them the way they've stored tyres. But I have only been there a few years, so I have to say no on that one. I don't know for sure. I'm sure they do everything really, we've not got an issue with them as a business. It's more the expansion of their business and then increases the risk. So that's where the concern is. Thanks.
I think we just have to be careful that we don't bring in the way somebody runs their company as part of planning.
I have to say I've got no issue with that at all. It's not that. That's not what we're worried about.
I'm just going to ask the officers to sum up what's been said there.
Yeah, there were a few points in there that that were touched on that I didn't cover in my initial presentation. So, drainage is an outline consideration. There was a condition imposed on the outline planning permission that required them to submit a SUD scheme. We haven't got that in front of us, so we don't know exactly what the drainage layout would look like. But equally, had they submitted it, we would not be in a position to approve it as part of this application anyway. It would have required a separate discharge of condition process. If there is a scenario in which, in the provision of because their layout doesn't show any space set aside for drainage, if they did come forward with a scheme that required alterations to the layout, then we would expect that there would be a subsequent amendment to this application to change the layout to accommodate that. Ecology was touched on briefly. There was a preliminary ecological assessment submitted with the outline site. It didn't identify any particular protected species that are resident on the site, although off the top of my head, I believe it did mention that the site could have been suitable for foraging for bats. There were recommendations for mitigation included in that. That's primarily limited to the provision of bird boxes, which we've seen on the layout for this scheme. The reserved matters approval that's before you today is recommended with a condition limiting lighting. We would require all of that information to be submitted up front prior to them installing any lighting, which should address both an ecological point and any issues with neighbour amenity. And lastly, on the specific use and the tyre storage, the processes that take place on the main site are waste processes. To carry out that at this expansion to the site would require a separate application to County Council. That's why there's a condition on the outline that limits it to storage only, because we can't consider waste processors. We're not the waste authority. My understanding is that the site is currently the subject of an EA permit, and presumably should they intend to store tyres here, then they would need an amendment to that permit or to seek an additional permit to cover this site. I think that covers all of the points. Thank you.
Thank you. So any more questions? No? You're free to vacate. So our second speaker is Mr. Andrew Clover, who is speaking as the agent for the applicant. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak in support of our application. I would simply like to take this opportunity to provide some background and to highlight some key points within your report. Firstly, as you've been made aware from the officer and the presentation, outline planning permission was granted in December last year under delegated powers. It's therefore somewhat surprising that this reserve matters application is before you today, especially when reasons for the call-in are already controlled by conditions on the outline permission. For example, in relation to visual harm, as a result of extensive negotiations with officers during the outline plan application, condition number 7 sets a maximum floor area, eaves and ridge height for the building. In the context of visual impact, these maximum sizes were considered to be acceptable at the outline stage. Given that this detailed application demonstrates that these dimensions have not been exceeded and that a robust landscaping scheme is proposed, again, it is questionable why this matter needs to be before you today. In relation to drainage and flooding, these are not material considerations for this application, as conditions are already in place from the outline application. What I can confirm is that during the course of this reserve matters application, we've been working in the background on drainage for the conditions, Percolation tests have already been carried out, and these confirm that there is infiltration available on the site. As a result, a scheme including sustainable drainage methods, mainly based on soakaways, will be submitted as part of a condition application. In relation to parking and turning space, LCC Highways had no objection to the outline application. During the course of this reserve matters application, Highways requested additional information in connection with parking and layout, including swept path analysis. BSP consulting engineers were commissioned to provide these detailed plans, which were submitted in early June, and you've seen them on the screen. It is clear from this information that there is more than adequate parking for staff and for HGVs within the site and to be able to turn at the access. So there is no issue with manoeuvrability within the site or at the entrance. It is for this reason that you've now heard that LCC Highways support the application. They have requested a condition regarding a footpath, which was already in there from the outline, and you may have just been able to make out on the plans that there is provision for a footpath as part of the proposal. Overall, your officers conclude that this reserve matters application complies with policies 2, 3 and 7 in respect of amenity, impact on neighbouring land uses and impact on landscape character. This is also found to accord with policy 36 in respect of access, parking and turning. I therefore respectfully ask that you accept your officer's recommendation. Whilst I still have time, I believe it is useful for members to have a bit more background to EnviroTire. The company was founded in 2002 by two local people who, having extensive knowledge and experience in the tyre industry, recognised a need for a professional, properly regulated disposal outlet for the vast quantity of waste tyres in Lincolnshire and the surrounding areas. After being granted planning permission in 2013 and obtaining a very robust Environment Agency permit, EnviroTire moved to their purpose-built site at Sutton. Starting with 6 employees, following 10 years of substantial growth, the company has grown to employ 35 local people and now needs more space for storage, further production facilities and parking for the increased number of staff, cars and company HGVs. EnviroTire has tried on several occasions to buy land adjacent on both sides of the existing site, but has been unsuccessful. The proposed site on the adjacent side of the road is owned by the company and will provide the necessary expansion for storage. The plans for this additional site are mainly based on providing staff parking, parking for HGVs and for additional storage. Production facilities will remain on the existing site, which has permission and permits for those uses. This will not only be significant benefit to the important local businesses, but also to the wider community, providing further employment opportunities. It is again for these reasons that I respectfully ask that you accept your officer's recommendation and approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clover. Have any members, Councillor Pierpoint again?
Thank you, Chairman. Listening to the objector and then listening to yourself, I would like some comfort and some confidence in your application in regarding the impact on the neighbours and residents local to this development. Can you give me some assurance or some comfort it will not impact on those people?
Well, EnviroTire have to work to, like I say, strict rules and regulations in terms of the process that they carry out, governed by the Environment Agency permit, obviously regulated by the council as well in terms of environmental health. Yeah, the business serves a very genuine need in the area, and it's been a successful business, which is why it's been a struggle to operate on its existing site. By allowing this application, you are allowing the business to expand, but to improve the way it operates, which should, actually help the neighbours in terms of the processes. There'll be more space to do this. The other side of the road will be just used for storage and parking. yeah, occasionally the land has had to be used for ad hoc parking, which isn't ideal, but it's you know, something that has had to happen. But obviously this will deal with that in the long term. So I would say this actually has the potential to make it better for those living close by.
Thank you.
Councillor Welbury.
Hello. Just a quick question. Are you storing whole tyres or bale tyres?
All the processes with the tyres, yeah, whether they are put into bales, will be carried out on the existing site. So it will only be the storage of, you know, the final product, whether that is a complete tyre or already baled tyres on the new site. I say there isn't any process going on the new site. It's literally just storing what is being done on the existing site.
So that's a mixture then of whole tyres and bale tyres. I just want to tell the committee that I do have experience in this industry, and a bale tyre presents very little fire risk, doesn't it? It's preferable to have a bale tyre because it is almost impossible, isn't it, to set fire to it?
It is.
Councillor Austin.
Has Councillor Welbury finished? Yes. Okay. No, I'm not. You know, carry on if you haven't. Yes, I don't think we've got to get carried away, have we? Because this is approval of reserved matters, and it lists really what they are, doesn't it? Access, appearance, landscape, layout, and scale. And really, all this, am I right in thinking all this building is going to be used is for storage? And then is this part of an ongoing process? Are they going somewhere else then to totally end their life? You know, what happens to them? They're literally being stored, are they? That's what I want to get clear in my mind. I find it a little ironic that this one is following the previous application, where, of course, those of us who remember, there was the major fire from storage of tyres in Curtin, you see, many years ago. So this is what I want to work out. They are being stored in a safe environment, and then where do they go after that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. This proposal on this side of the site is primarily for storage. You'll have to forgive me, I'm not fully adverse with the way that the business operates, but in terms of this application, it is just for storage. Yeah, eventually those tyres do move on for recycling or other processes elsewhere.
Councillor Broughton.
Thank you, Chair. One of the objective's main issues was traffic. Have you any idea of the number of new employees this proposed application may generate?
I don't know exactly, but I suppose it will be a small number in a way, because as we know, this is just for storage. Yeah, we're not carrying out any manufacturing or process within this additional site, and obviously the staff that are there will only be, you know, taking the product across the road to store. So I mean, it might create additional employment on the existing site, because obviously that will free up space where they have permission to carry out processing. So yeah, there will be some additional employment, but I don't think to a level that would be harmful to the area.
Okay, thank you very much. There we come. So here we are, the best till last. Our final speaker is Councillor James Cantwell, who is the ward member who will call this application to committee. Councillor Cantwell, you are not subject to any time representation. Please remain seated when you have finished speaking to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, fellow councillors and attendees. And I would particularly also like to thank the resident from Mill Lane, from Reed Point, who's here to represent Mill Lane and Reed Point from coming this morning. You have heard from the resident regarding this, and you can see there are several valid concerns which have been raised under points 5 and 6 of the agenda pack. With Sutton Parish Council unanimously objecting to the reserved matters. I'd ask members to note that neither myself or Sutton Parish Council objected to the outline permission. We do not oppose development on this land, only that it is sympathetic to the neighbours and residents who will be there for the long term. We must be mindful as well of the landscape and rural heritage of this area. I would like to delve deeper into a number of comments made on the officer's report, which I feel we can go further in depth with. I will start with point 7.7. And I would find that under policy 7, this reserve matters is contrary to points B and C. There is no significant adverse impact upon the character and appearance of the area. As I will demonstrate further on, there is. The design is responsive to the local context. It is my argument that this design is not. I'd begin with the comments on 7.13. Members should note that there has been a previous inspectorate decision on this site. And while the applications do vary, they are both commercial in nature and surely bear weight on this application. This went through an entire process and got refused at the end. Clearly, there is valid reason to have a further look into development on this site, and more importantly, development that is sympathetic to neighbours' needs. If we move on to point 7.15, I would note that the officers made reference to the wider context further down in the paragraph, the wider rural context. What this is not mentioned is the near rural context. And if the current building is allowed to be put forward, it would damage the near rural context. Officers are right, there are a number of agricultural buildings around Sutton Parish. However, there will be none as dominating as this building on this particular site. It is a single hard structure, and my belief is more mitigation is needed, and more importantly, mitigation with the consultation with residents, which none have been undertaken. I'd move to point 7.16. The applicant and the officers make reference to a cluster of tree planting. I think we must be especially cautious with how we look at mitigation, particularly in the rural context of the area. It must be sympathetic to the local agricultural needs and must not be a haven or add to the haven that is currently there for vermin, such as pigeons and rats. I am confident that due regard has not been given to this matter. I'd move to point 7.17, and I would say again, not enough mitigation has been considered and the type of mitigation has not been thoroughly reviewed. I referred to my previous points about the impact on agriculture and also impact on neighbouring residents' properties. Move to 7.18, I would say there is not support for local residents in this regard. It is not considerate of neighbouring properties and the wider landscape as well. Moving on to 7.27, in the wider context of highways, I would ask members to note that there is a sharp bend further up the road across from Mill Lane. This is a particularly dangerous bend, and I regularly drive Spalding Road, so I can attest to that. I am not totally convinced that there is adequate room to manoeuvre HGVs in this site, but I accept that the Lincolnshire County Council and officers have made a decision on this. I'd move to point 7.37. And I would ask that in failing a rejection by this committee, that compliance, as mentioned on sentence 3, needs to be secured by condition, if it has not been already. And I would also further add that there is no support for bats in the local area. The bat colonies around Suston, there are a number, and there is no mention of further support which could be given to these colonies on the applicant's proposal. Moving to 8.3, I would disagree that harm has been successfully mitigated. I am confident with further work and with the committee refusing this application on this occasion that we can get this proposal to a point where it is agreeable from the parish council's point of view, the applicant's point of view, and the residents' point of view. I'd make a small note on drainage, which has been mentioned by my resident and the officers. While I recognise it is not a ground for this committee, I would note that there are regular flooding issues around this area. And it is my sincere belief that drainage needs to be addressed before this application can be considered. As I said, I am not against development, but as councillors, we must assure that we have a happy balance between applicant and resident, and the current proposal does not do this. As I've said as well, I am in no doubt with further work, we can minimise the impacts. So I would ask the committee on this occasion to reject the reserved matters so this can occur. We need to go back to the drawing board and ensure both applicant and resident have a voice in this matter. I recognise the hard work that has gone in from the officers and the applicant's perspective. And I would just like to leave it with a note that the applicant said, by allowing this application, you are allowing a business to expand. And I think that that's a partially correct comment, because although you're allowing a business to expand, you're allowing it to expand at the detriment of its neighbours and my residents. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Do we have any questions? Amazing. Yes, well, Jyoti.
I just have a comment really. Yeah, it's a question to Councillor Cantwell. With regards to the lighting of the proposed lighting at the proposed site, particularly you mentioned Bats Colony, because they particularly tend to suffer from artificial lighting. So what is your suggestion probably for that?
As I understand, the lighting is not to be considered today, but I'm not an expert on what lighting does not impact bats, but it needs to be very sympathetic to the colonies. As I say, Suston's a prime place for bat habitation and a number of other different species as well. So yeah, when that does get discussed, it needs to be certainly sympathetic. And I would encourage the applicant to engage in conversations with local residents and the parish council and myself and my ward colleague as well when that comes around.
I'll just make a quick comment. Very interesting that you pulled a lot of points up there, but your objections seem to be mainly on your opinion. Would you agree?
I would disagree. I would say my objection is based on the opinion of the parish council and the residents of Reed Point and Mill Lane.
Okay, so no experts were employed to get traffic numbers to see what alternative designs could be done. It's all just, we don't like that, So therefore, we'll say it's not very good.
I would say in regards to consultation with the parish council and the residents, there was none by the applicant. If the committee does choose to refuse this, then I'm more than willing for experts and the parish council to get involved in this. But equally, if you're thinking about experts being employed by the council to judge this, then Sutton Parish Council is a very small authority.
No, I thought you were probably going to get some experts involved with to support your argument from the parish council, but you haven't.
No, that's not something
So
I would
it's
do.
all come as opinion from yourself and the parish council.
And the residents of Mill Lane and Repoint.
Okay, thank you. Jotty.
I was just wondering whether that was up to the planning officers to actually, because the concerns, the way it needs to be addressed. I was just wondering who the onus is, or whether it is on the planning officers, on the council to actually.
I don't think it's for the council to try and come up with a better design or.
Not the design, but addressing the concerns in terms of.
Well, his concerns are the design and flooding and general things that have already been passed. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say that where it comes to things like traffic, we have statutory consultations. We've consulted LCC as the Highways Authority on this. Where it comes to the production of additional documentation, again, using traffic as an example, County Council will ask for transport assessments where they think it's necessary, and they haven't asked for one in this case. And things like the ecology report was submitted at outline.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you. With due respect, Mr. Chairman, I felt your comment was somewhat unfair. Well, I would have expected probably that when an application comes in and it's obviously come in via the agent, but I would have probably expected the officers to see if there's any way that things can be improved. I don't know whether, obviously I don't know what's gone on behind the scenes, but looking at the development manager and the planning officer, I can't.
Councillor Austin, do you have a question?
I have a comment, which I think was probably as good as your comment, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Is there would the perhaps it's not fair to ask this of the ward member. I perhaps should have been asking this
Can we ask the ward?
But I please finish. Do not interrupt me, sir.
Can you
was
please
just
stop
saying-
interrupting me while I ask for the councillor to leave now because he's had his time?
Well, I have said I will not ask this of the councillor now. I will reserve
Can we
this
let him
for
leave
the
then?
general conversation discussion later. Thank you.
Or comments?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say I'm not happy with the way that Councillor Austin has conducted herself towards you in this committee meeting. You do not bang a table and shout at a chairman in a meeting like this. It is not acceptable. It's unprofessional. I'm not happy with that conduct. I would like an apology from Councillor Austin to the chairman and the rest of this committee for your conduct.
Thank you, Councillor. I will apologise. I have apologised, and I also apologise, though, at that moment to the ward member who was sitting at the speaker, and I have apologised, and I will now refrain from saying anything else. Thank you. of
Thank you,
the
Councillor
measures.
Austin. Your apologies accepted. So I think at this point we need somebody to make a proposal. Councillor Bedford.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, there's a few points. Residents' concerns, parish councils, etc. That should be done at a local level. Planning officers put the notice up and everything else, send it out to the parishes. So if they're not involved at that level, well, they're not going to be involved. Full stop. That field has been a wilderness for years because Sturmers used to have old logs and tractors and all sorts of everything in there. It really was. I don't have a problem with it. I'm surprised, if you like, that this has come to committee, because usually it's done by officers once the outline permission is there. I can never remember one coming before, I don't think. But anyway, is there a chance of getting an additional condition that a fire hydrant is added to the site and that inside the storage building a sprinkler system is put in there? Because tyres, once they are combusted, you have a job to put them out. Whereas if a sprinkler system is inside, it would activate immediately. And the fact that a fire hydrant on site gives the fire people the water to deal accordingly. And then I would move it, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Dorian.
Thank you, Chair. I can't support. I want to support the recommendation because I believe in growth and prosperity, and I think that I like to see local people do well. I hear what the agent says. It's local people that have started the company. They're expanding the company. They're offering employment to residents in the area, and all that's a good thing. I can't support the addition of a condition, Councillor Bedford, because I think that there's very clear processes for the storage of tyres that where they get permits through the EA, and if they deem it necessary to put in a sprinkler system, I'm sure they'd add that to the condition. What I don't want to do, Mr. Chairman, is to add cost onto the applicant unnecessarily. So I would move the recommendation as it is set out in the paper, with no additional conditions, just the ones that are there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Woodliffe.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been inclined to support Councillor Peter Bedford's position. I accept what Councillor Dorian says about costs and so on, but we've seen one major fire in this area. I think it was on the New Life church area, where those tyres burnt for weeks, basically, and the impact on residents could be colossal, and the reputation of this council accordingly. So I think Councillor Peter Bedford makes a very reasonable suggestion, is that we, I encourage the firm to put in fire risk prevention measures to ensure that the safety of the residents is paramount, and that impact on our reputation as a council is mitigated should there be some tragedy there. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Pierpoint. I'll come back to you.
My concern, Chairman, was I was a bit confused about the drainage scheme that was being asked for. Is this part of this application, or is that going to come in separately? I need to understand where we stand on this before I vote on anything.
So there was a condition on the outline approval that required a drainage scheme to be submitted. That is required before development starts, but it's not required before or as part of the submission of the reserve matters. It will be they will have to submit a separate application to discharge that condition before they can start work.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may just address the committee on the point that's been raised around further condition. I have to advise that we have to have to be careful in that situation, that planning doesn't step into an arena that it shouldn't be in. National guidance is quite clear on that, where there are other permissive regimes, that planning shouldn't step into that space. So I think my only professional advice can be to not move forward with such a condition. building regs, Environment Agency permit, et cetera, would pick that up. But of course, I understand the point that's been raised and the concern that's been raised. But my view would be is that's not within the purview of planning and would be picked up elsewhere.
Okay. Councillor Welbury.
I support Councillor Dorian. Like I say, I have experience in this field, and I'm sure the EA have put in all conditions in place regarding fire management. And if there is a large area of bell tyres, then like we discussed before, there isn't really a fire risk.
He's suggesting you don't put it in, so withdrawing your suggestion.
Chairman, I will withdraw the bit about the extra, but I want it noted, please, that I brought it up because if ever there's a fire there, it can refer back to the fact of that.
Thank you, Councillor Bedford. I understand that there's a highways point needs to be brought in as well.
Just that Councillor Dorian's recommendation specified no additional conditions above the report, and there were the two that I mentioned at the beginning regarding highways. Just want to be clear whether or not they're included.
Yes, are you including those, Councillor Dorian?
I'm happy to defer to Councillor Bedford if he's moving his original.
No, he's not.
He's not.
He's withdrawn it. Right, so you're including with the two that were on before. Right, do we all know what? So now we need a seconder for that. Councillor Welbury. Right, are we all clear on what we're voting on? Yeah? Okay. Well, do you want, it's the recommendation as the report in front of you, plus the two conditions that were voiced at the beginning, yeah, on highways. Okay. Right, all those in favour? Against? Are you against or abstaining? Okay. Thank you, everybody. I think I now have to say that that application was carried. Thank you. So everybody, thank you very much for coming. That officially closes the meeting for us. And I think we are supposed to meet again in September. Enjoy your holidays.